Coming up on this week's show, Space Invaders comes to the real world.
Coolest Half-Life 2 mod ever.
And we talk to the founder of Wave Game Studios and Debug Magazine, Daniel Crocker.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books you absolutely have to check out this summer, Metal Slug, The Ultimate History. A loving homage to SNK's comedy shooter, beautifully produced in 452 colourful pages using their trademark gorgeous Pantone inks, black foil block cover and the finest possible print quality. So you can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 388, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for another hour-ish, where we reminisce about all things retro gaming and technology related. Basically, if you remember this sound,
you've got mail.
This is a podcast for you.
What's that, AOL?
You know what? Yeah, it is. And I think this is one of those cases where we've obviously seen the Tom Hanks movie. We obviously, we've seen that so many times on YouTube and stuff like that. It's kind of fallen into our consciousness a bit, I think. But actually over here in the UK, we never had this.
You've got mail.
That was on the American version of AOL. Do you remember what we had in the UK?
No.
You've got Post.
Any idea who that is?
Joanna Lumley.
You've got Post.
Joanna Lumley, of course it is. So
Brilliant.
Yeah, she's kind of been forgotten. But that's what we explore in this era. The classic age, the 90s, the 80s, even going back to like the 70s sometimes as well. And we explore bringing classic games, classic consoles into the modern age as well. And it does seem recently the Dreamcast has been getting so much love, hasn't it? New games, new titles coming out. We've done a few episodes about the Dreamcast recently, and we thought we'd continue that because, I know, Ravi, you were chatting to these guys at a gaming event in Nottingham a couple of weeks ago, and this is Wave Game Studios, who are making some of the most impressive Dreamcast games I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, it's pretty amazing to see this whole kind of Dreamcast scene growing up and, stuff getting published and also like officially published as well. So Wave Game Studios are absolutely amazing. They've ported Postal, which is one that we were talking about quite a while ago. That was one of their big releases, but they've also done lots of indie titles, and they run Debug Magazine as well. So Debug Magazine is also founded by the founder of Wave Game Studios, Daniel, who we...
What is Debug Magazine then? I'm not seeing
So
that
Debug Magazine is a magazine all about indie games. And, a lot of these indie games also have retro influence in them as well. So it's a very good look at that. And it's kind of good to get exposure for people in these magazines. But the Dreamcast games, oh my God, they've just released one called Driving Strikers. And that has online multiplayer. And it's not using SegaNet. It's basically direct to the other Dreamcast, or you can play cross-play on the PC as well, which is pretty amazing. Oh. And, it's the only Dreamcast game since 2002 that's been released with that online feature. So, they're really pushing what's coming out for the Dreamcast and pushing that kind of professional publishing vibe with really nice, covers, manuals, extra soundtracks, and the way that they produce these games is absolutely fantastic.
Well, I know you and Joe did this interview, and I'm looking at their website now, and yeah, the quality of some of these games. I mean, they've got one that looks a bit like a kind of side-scrolling Streets of Rage kind of game called Shadow Gangs. That looks right up your street, Joe, this one.
Yeah, Shadow Gangs, that's been getting quite a bit of love for the last year, actually. Quite a few YouTubers covering that. Kind of a crossover Streets of Rage meets Shinobi. Very late 80s Sega. And a lot of the games they cover, Daniel kind of said, sometimes you'll pick them up and play them and you'll go, that's very reminiscent of this classic Sega game. So, they always kind of like the games they put out are very fitting for the Dreamcast. Like I say, some of them are retro, some of them are 3D and really kind of push the Dreamcast to its limits. There's Xenocider, which is very reminiscent of Space Harrier, but with the Dreamcast, kind of 3D visuals and stuff like that. And it's really interesting kind of listening to him talk about how a lot of the games still utilize the VMU, and, you know, games back then, some of them didn't even use the VMU. So it's great to see this little indie studio, you know, utilizing that, and just kind of hearing about how, you know, how you put these games out and how you actually make them and how you contact the studios and stuff like that. It's really interesting, and really does feel like 2023 is definitely the year of the Dreamcast at the moment. You know, kind of 21 years after its demise. Interesting.
There's the episode title.
There you go.
It is very cool. Because I'm looking at, I mean, they sell these physically, don't they, as well?
Yeah.
And like the price of them, I mean, they're ranging from about 15 to 30 quid. So, yeah, I mean, really affordable.
And
I mean,
like,
a lot of these are like, you got another like limited run games. I understand, you know, they're doing cartridges a lot of the time, but they're often like 60, 70 quid, aren't they?
and these have stuff like, you know, VGA is supported on there as well. And they're region free as well, which is really important. So, you know, you can play them on any Dreamcast in any region, which is pretty amazing. And I love all these extra features, you know, stuff like Rumble Pack support. Really, really cool.
So we'll find out why 2023 is the year of the Dreamcast with founder of Wave Game Studios and Debug Magazine, Daniel Crocker. He's going to be our special guest on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, he's not the only guest that we've got on the podcast this week. Hey, Pete.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. How are you guys? Hello, Retro.
Very good, thank you. Well, this is we've kind of done this a couple of times now. Something we kind of do irregularly, where we invite someone on from our patron community who we enjoy talking to on our patrons hangout. So we think would be great to come on and kind of give their thoughts on the news stories as well. And Pete, you've been a massive part of our patrons community. You're on, you know, pretty much all the hangouts. We lucky enough to meet in person at Ravi's Kickstarter event a couple of weeks ago as well. So, I mean, for those who might not have met you before, kind of give us your background. I mean, what are you kind of into retro-wise?
Oof, wow, how long have you got? Feel free to edit me down because I could go on. I've had an IT career that's gone pretty much, or experience from being a very young age. My first computer was console was a Binatone TV Master that came out in 1976, which was just a year after I was born. And for those that don't know, it's kind of one of those Pong clones that came out with a bat and ball. So you just had basically a wheel you held in your hand. And the nice thing was, what I remember is it was kind of a social thing because there was two of you playing, and it was that simple. Your mum and dad and your grandparents could use it. It was one of the first games that I had that, everybody in the family took part of and played and enjoyed. And that was really cool. And I've still got that boxed up in the loft. And recently I did a little bit of a mod on it so I could play it on a more modern screen instead of using the old UHF.
Nice.
After that, around 8, I got a Commodore VIC-20. I've still got that machine as well. But they did an awesome job with that. You know, all the manuals, the intro guides, everything that they gave you with that computer to kind of encourage you to explore programming it, learning BASIC, really fiddling around to get to this idea of, you know, I could type things in and color and sound and all sorts of stuff came out of it. And it was just absolutely fascinated me what I could do with this box of electronics. And a couple of years later, you know, I went down the usual route in the UK where you either end up with a Spectrum 48K or an Amstrad or a Commodore 64. And I had a 48K Plus, so not just a 48K for me, which I love just not only for the games, but again, the creative stuff. Like there was a program called The Artist where it let you draw. It's kind of freehand. And Wham, the music box, which, I don't know if you're into Wham, guys.
I watched a documentary on Netflix the other day.
Oh, did you really? What about Wham or Wham, the music box?
Yeah, Wham, yeah.
Oh, Wham.
No, Wham themselves, yeah.
Well, back then, so that you could get all those wonderful Wham music gems that I'm sure you dance around the garage to, Dan, but in wonderful Spectrum sound. But it was great. Nice. You could make your own, noise in my case, through the computer. I'd like to say music, but...
so you've kind of explored the more like creative side of computing as well. I mean, I know obviously that Binatone device give you a lifelong addiction to gaming as well. So it's going to be great to kind of get your input on today's stories as well, Pete. So I really appreciate you joining us. And we have got plenty of news stories to delve into this week. So why don't we start with AR? Now, AR obviously a couple of years ago that kind of made the headlines everywhere. And I don't know if you played it much, Pete, but I know Ravi and Joe, you guys were addicted to the Pokemon Go game when that came out.
I was so addicted that I was out at, I think it was 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. And I was at a local Pokemon gym in a very sketchy area, actually. And I looked across and there was another Pokemon person playing. And I was like, obviously battling them, but I was like, should I approach someone at 4 a.m. in the morning and be like, no? So I just kind of left it. And but I did get really addicted to that. And that was probably one of the biggest AR titles that I've played. I don't think I've played any other AR titles that have ever got me, that into gaming.
I was hugely into Ingress. That was kind of the precursor to before Niantic. They moved on to do the Pokemon stuff that was really popular, but Ingress was very, very good.
Didn't they use a lot of the locations in Ingress already and transferred it over to Pokemon?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, they used it to gather data basically and then push it into Pokemon. But it was really great because it got you out and about with all your friends, and you were discovering things locally that I knew nothing about. All these historical items that were portals and they were magic. And then you were stumbling over like a stone you've walked past 100 times before, and suddenly you realise it's of historical importance, and you've got no idea. So, AR games can be quite good, especially when they get you out and about, I think.
Yeah, well, this new one, this is, it's not anywhere near as in-depth as something like Pokemon Go. But this is a celebration of Space Invaders to celebrate the game's 45th anniversary. This is a game called Space Invaders World Defense, and it is free to download on Android and iOS. And this is basically, it's an AR version of Space Invaders. Now, it has got, multiplayer elements in there as well, so you can compete with friends and other players nearby. But really what it means is you need to be outside to play this game as well. So I tried to play it in my house, and literally the game tells you that you have to get up and go outside if you try and play it indoors. So what it does, it basically gives you Space Invaders outside, and the Space Invaders come down around buildings and your street and trees and everything as well. Obviously, you're looking at it through your phone. Now, I played with this for about 5 minutes earlier on before we did the podcast. I must admit, AR to me, I think I understand where, Pete and Ravi are coming from there, if you're playing it with other people in real life. But for me, standing there on the front of my house, pointing my phone at my neighbours' houses for 5 minutes, I don't know, it just felt a little bit weird.
The neighbours are down at it in the garden again. What's he doing?
Yeah, what? Is he recording our house? What's he doing, pointing the camera directly at my house for like 5 minutes?
And then you have to explain to him you're shooting aliens out of the sky.
Yeah, I'm sitting there going, pew, 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 pew. But what do you guys think of this? Is this something you've played? Is it something that looks interesting?
So I haven't played it yet. I've just been watching the trailer on it, and I'm glad to see they're like massive in between the buildings. It's not like the little ones and hundreds of little ones. But just to point out, I barely played Pokemon Go, by the way, when you said I was addicted to it.
Was it your missus that got into it?
I played it a little bit, and my missus played it a little bit for about a week or two. But yeah, I think this looks pretty interesting. I'm going to give it a download. And I thought, yeah, I'll give that a go. And then I thought, I'll be playing it on my walk to work tomorrow, and I probably will look a bit weird. That is that.
Yeah.
Just keep an eye when you're crossing the road, Joe.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. The AR market at the moment, there's this article on Eurogamer that I'll link up as well. They're saying that, the Pokemon Go developer, Niantic, that we mentioned there, they've laid off a quarter of their staff recently as well. They've cancelled their upcoming Marvel World of Heroes project as well. So it doesn't seem like it's not a great time for AR at the moment. Apparently Apple's Vision Pro headset is not being selling as well as they expected, maybe because they wanted $3,500 for it.
Well,
could be a reason
it wasn't
why.
meant for consumers. I think that's meant for developers to try and figure out ways to actually develop some decent software for the device. It's not meant to be affordable, I don't think, for humans.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I
imagine
they want to shrink
humans.
that.
I'm sure developers are humans. I employ a few of them. Also, I'm really going to get it in the neck when they hear this.
But to me, this game's a freebie. It's to celebrate something great, Space Invaders' 45th birthday. So I think for that reason, I think it is definitely worth a download, and you'll get a few minutes worth of fun out of it. And I'm sure some people will become addicted to it, probably.
I think we're going to see a lot more of these because obviously Apple's going to be going for that, and there's been lots of attempts at AR and stuff. There's Google Glass as well, wasn't there? And there's also this wand one that's come out recently. Cast AR, that was the one. And Cast AR is an interesting concept, which is you've kind of got glasses and you've got a wand and you kind of play like chess and interactive stuff, or you'd have like battle games, but you do it on a table where you're sitting down and you're not kind of wandering around the world. So I think there's still a bit of exploration in different areas to go, and of course people are always going to mess up with it, but when something hits like Pokemon Go did, then it's absolutely huge. Like that was unstoppable at one point, you know.
Well, let's go get all the kids playing Space Invaders. That could be the next cool thing. It's like 1978 all over again. So if you want to download that, it is free now on the Google Play Store and iOS App Store as well. So I'll link that up in our show notes if you want to check it out. Now, I was shopping at a retro game store over the weekend. I went up to see my friend in Leeds. Had a little wander around. Half-Life 2, now that was an amazing game. I was quite surprised to see that a copy of Half-Life 2 in a retro gaming store on the original Xbox is 25 quid.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's shot up in price. I remember buying that. God, must have been about £2 when I bought it about a decade ago. Obviously, I think, over the last couple of decades, it's definitely become an iconic cult game and something that keeps getting improved due to the modding scene as well. But I've got to say, I've seen a lot of Half-Life mods. This one, that's been all over my socials this week, could possibly be the greatest Half-Life 2 mod I've ever seen.
I've never played the Half-Life games. You've just got me into trouble there. You've just outed me. And I do like the Lego games.
You've played the Lego games, but you haven't played
I've played the Lego games. And completed
The Life of a Father.
The Life of a Father. I ain't even going to lie to you. I've been playing these Lego games for about 10 years. But I haven't played the Half-Life games. Maybe this is my excuse to finally pick them up. But yeah, I think this does look pretty funny. My only kind of like downfall of it, because it's awesome, because it's a 1-for-1 recreation, of the original game, and like it's all completely playable. It's a huge, it's a mod. It's completely sorted and everything. And
well, we didn't mention what it was. Someone's basically it's a mod that turns Half-Life into a Lego game.
Yeah,
so it replaces all the characters in there with actual little Lego men.
Yeah, with the Lego minifigures. But my only problem with it is the ratios don't kind of translate to the game. So obviously Half-Life being a first-person shooter and the Lego games being third-person, kind of top-down, kind of isometric views, some of them from behind. It's modded it so it's a from-behind view, but it's kind of like pretty close, kind of over the shoulder, sometimes over the top of the head. And it looks a little bit seasickness to me, a little bit jarring.
It's interesting because Telltale Games were the guys that originally released the Lego titles, and they went defunct around 4 years ago. So it's good to see kind of mods coming out and continuing this, because those games seemed incredibly popular, and they do them on a lot of films, and that kind of company was also founded from ex LucasArts developers as well. So it's got that whole connection. Having it in the Half-Life world is quite interesting, because you've got the whole cinematic aspect of Half-Life as well.
Do you want some bad news, guys?
Yeah, I know it's been pulled.
No.
Yeah, and that's the thing. As soon as I saw this, I knew this was going to get taken down. Apparently, the Lego company copyright struck it straight away. So I don't think it's available anymore. There's literally just a little trailer that you can watch now. But I think, were you much of a Half-Life fan, Pete? It sounds like it might have been something your story.
Oh, wow, yeah. They really started the first-person shooter idea where you'd actually got a story, something really cinematic. It was like you were playing a film. Those games really kick-started a revolution in gaming. If they didn't, someone else would, but they really were the first to bring alive a story. And the fact that you can mod them and do everything else for so many years later is absolutely awesome. And I saw the video for this Lego thing, and it was so good. It was so shiny. This guy had poured his heart and soul into it. The mod is called Not Dave or Daniel, which intrigued me because I had the idea maybe he got fed up with people mixing him up with his other two brothers called Dave and Daniel or something. So I'm going to guess he's a Derek. Maybe he's a Derek. I don't know.
Yeah, and I remember. I think I played Half-Life 2 when it was in the orange box. I think, wasn't it, on the 360? That's when I really got into it. But yeah, this mod basically, it's obviously for the PC version of it. And one thing I do like about it is if you watch the trailer, it is literally just all they've done is replace the characters with Lego men and women. So all the drama's still there, all the gritty, dark, dystopian stories still there as well, all the enemies. So there's that great mixture, I think, between it just being so ridiculous with the Lego characters in there, but that really gritty storyline still remains. Yeah. So it is a shame, unfortunately.
I can't think of another Lego game where you actually get to shoot and kill the Lego creatures. Now, to feel a bit guilty doing it, killing a Lego man.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's one thing. I mean, the original weapons are still in there in the game as well, but apparently there is another mod that you can put onto Half-Life 2 called Lordo Antonio's Tools and Weapons Lego Collection mod that turns all the guns into Lego weapons as well. So that could be a good combination. So I know Lego have taken it down, but I'm sure there will be some dark and dingy corner of the internet where a file still exists. Message Ravi if you want the link, I'm sure. So Half-Life 2 Lego game looks really good if you want to check that out. I'll put that in our show notes along with the rest of the stories on the podcast app, or head to our website at theretrohour.com. Now, Atari seem to be on a bit of a roll at the moment. I mean, we're talking about them releasing, the first new Atari branded cartridge for the 2600 in got about 30 years the other week on the show. This one, I think, is slightly more niche, as Atari have now launched a collectible arcade circuit board.
This is
reproduction of retro classics.
Yeah, this is really, really weird, actually, because I thought these would just be, fun kind of boards that, look like the originals, but they're just kind of, you can stick them on the wall. They're not functional. They don't do anything. And then I looked at the pricing and I was like, okay, $208. Now, looking at these actual PCBs, they seem to be collector's items, but also you can actually, they follow the original schematics. So you can actually replace put the Atari chips in from the old boards, put them into these new ones and actually use them as replacements, which I can imagine a lot of these boards are, getting quite old, the original ones are. Ooh. So getting a replacement board is a wicked idea. And then you've got some history and facts on the back. And this shows like a level of attention to detail that I wouldn't have expected. I know they've been releasing some 2600 carts and stuff that actually work. And seeing this, it really makes me smile, actually, because I could imagine, just getting a random circuit board, putting it out there and selling it. But this has got some proper thought.
I want to like it. It's one of those things where I kind of feel like if you appreciate it and look at it and you want to hang it on your wall, that's brilliant. I went to a gallery in the mailbox recently. I was just passing it, going somewhere else. And I had a look around at all sorts of art and things in there, but I certainly wouldn't want any of that on my wall. And it was an awful lot more expensive than this. So to me, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you appreciate what it is and you want to spend the money, stick it on the wall, that's fantastic. But it's kind of not my thing. I love the idea of using it as a game or breathing new life into an arcade cabinet. I think that's wonderful. But I don't get the idea of selling it as a piece of art. Not with that.
I thought that was strange as well because of, they look cool. They're like the green motherboard style and they have the logo of the games on there. And there's 5 of them, isn't there? Or is there 6 of them? I think there's 5 of them. But interestingly, they have like facts and history about the games printed on them as well. But apparently there's that much text and information on there. It's actually really difficult to read it. So from like kind of like an art piece, it's kind of like, I guess it's meant to be multifunctional. It's like, it's got historical things about the game on there as well, but you can't really read it. You have to get right up close and stuff. So I can't kind of work out if it's meant to be a piece of art or, like you say, a replacement for your arcade board, which I think is really cool. But which is it? Does that make sense?
I've got a feeling that this is, there is 5 of them. So you've got Gravatar, Major Havoc, Black Widow, Warlords, and Lunar Lander. All of these are available to play in many different ways. They're on the Atari 50 collection as well. But I've got a feeling that, if they were just releasing these for people that own the original arcades, that is a very, very niche market, isn't it? So they're not going to, probably won't be worth the while printing them just for that market, I imagine. So that's probably why they're pushing these as kind of art pieces to sell more of them.
Thinking about like consoles or old computers. So at the moment with the Amiga scene, we get a lot of printed Amiga 4000 PCBs with like modifications and, you can then transplant all the stuff to them. And maybe, I don't know about arcade PCBs, but maybe there was a whole scene emerging of people, printing them and doing reproduction ones. And I don't know, I guess Atari might have looked at that and said, well, why don't we do that ourselves, but turn it into a piece of art as well? Like sell it as that, spin it that way. And maybe they want to maintain that copyright as well. And and keep it so it's in their kind of control. I'm not quite sure, but I've seen a lot of reproduction boards coming out for all sorts of machines, and I don't know where the law kind of lies on this, especially with arcades and stuff.
Yeah, it does generally tend to be more of a hobbyist thing, doesn't it? I don't think I've seen any kind of major companies kind of doing this themselves. So it's quite interesting to see Atari kind of going down this route.
Yeah, this is the first one that I've seen from like a major company. Yeah,
I've got to say that Atari keeps surprising us.
Yeah,
every time we talk about them recently, this has been like, wow, didn't expect that to happen.
It's definitely changed from the little classic Atari Mini stuff that they had. Really,
or the hotels,
or the broken ones, or the hotels, or the cryptocurrency as well.
Yeah. What a time to be alive and an Atari fan. So if you're going to check that out, they are available now, and apparently they're not pre-orders. They're actually, you order it and it arrives day after or a couple of days later. So they're actually obviously a bit of confidence that they're going to sell these. They've actually printed them all up already. So I'll link that up in our show notes. Want to check it out. Now, something else that seems to be quite on trend in retro at the moment seems to be making new memory cards for retro systems. Now, Joe, we were talking about this the other week on the podcast, that MemCard Pro for the GameCube, and now it turns out that PlayStation 1 and 2 fans are getting some love.
Yeah, this is coming from, it's the same people who made the GameCube one, so it's coming from
8-Bit Mods.
8-Bit Mods, thank you for that. So they've previously released the original MemCard, but this is the MemCard Pro. The difference being with this one is it works with both PS1 and PS2, whereas the previous one just worked on PS1. And it makes sense because of obviously the original PS2 memory card, you could put PS1 saves on there. So you can do that now with this one. Very similar to the GameCube one. So essentially you can put a micro SD card in there and back up all of your save files and essentially make it unlimited storage as they position it. And once again, with one of the tiny little OLED screens on there, which I always love because they're so small, but functional and kind of tell you what's going on with the memory card and stuff like that. Something you think you'd be buying, Pete?
100%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've recently discovered the magic of installing a SATA SSD drive into my fat PS2. I was very tempted actually to buy yours that you were selling at Ravi's Kickstarter event, because I saw that was just as another spare. But yeah, I've got that situation where I've got a whole bunch of games to play now, but I've got a whole load of memory cards, and you soon fill them up, and you're swapping them around all the time, and you have no idea what save's on there. You're constantly wadding them in until the game says, "Oh, here's a save game." And the annoying thing about the PlayStation as well is that though you've got two save ports, I don't know if you guys find this. Do you find that the games don't always find the save on the second port? They always seem to want to find them on port one.
And my port one's taken up by the the hacked SD, the hacked memory card that basically boots it. And the second one's always a bit flaky.
Apparently this does work with the Mech-free boot as well. So if you are using that, you can use this in port one as a Mech-free boot as well, apparently.
Now, I'm wondering as well, obviously, if you can basically have pretty much every PlayStation game saved on this, with the capacity that it's got. So you posted on our Facebook the other day, Joe. I wonder how much this is going to mess with Psycho Mantis from Metal Gear Solid. You got like 1,000 games on there.
Yeah, I mean, it was only select games, luckily, that he kind of spoke about, and they were other Konami titles. But that would be pretty funny if he had all those lines of dialogue and it's just like, oh, I can see you've played.
Well, for people that haven't played that, explain what that is and kind of, when did you experience that? Because that was an amazing...
Well, yeah, so on the Metal Gear Solid for the PS1, when you fought one of the bosses, Psycho Mantis, who is a psychic, the novelty was he could read your mind. So he would tell you about the games you've been playing. If they were other Konami games, so go, I see you've been playing Castlevania. And as a child, or even as an adult, at that time, it was probably pretty mind-blowing to see that it was reading your memory card, which I guess is pretty easy at the end of the day, and just certain lines of dialogue inserted in the games that would be triggered if that save is detected. Amongst other things, such as changing controller ports over and stuff to stop him from controlling you around the room. But yeah, that would be funny if he was like, I can see you have 14,000 saves on your, on your memory card.
I'm not even going to bother picking one,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do like the idea of these, and this one, it's £40, which, I guess is probably quite expensive for a memory card, being that you can buy them for about £4 normally in CX, the original ones, but for the the amount that you get on here as well, and having backup and Wi-Fi support and stuff like that. I mean, it's and that game ID function that we talked about as well. So yeah, it does seem like if you care about that kind of thing, then it's will be worth adding to your collections. If you want to check that out, I'll link that up in our show notes as well. Now, when we get a patron on the podcast, we always invite them to bring along a story as well, Pete. Now, you've sent us one here, a company called Megavision Software, who are working on a retro-inspired RPG at the moment that started all the way back in 1993.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I have to fully respect these guys. They were a little bit like me when I was that kind of age. I wanted to make my own game and started along the trail of doing that. But like many people my age doing that, never really drew it to any conclusion. Maybe we didn't have the skills or the time or what, I don't know. Anyway, these guys, I think they were brothers or something, and I don't know, maybe just friends. And they had this idea after playing Eye of Beholder and games like that, the dungeon crawlers, the ones where you basically just flick screen forward, left, right, and things, AD&D type things. And they'd got their idea of bringing their own story to life called Mystic Land. And after 30 years, these two guys have got back together and decided they're actually going to finish this game. Which I think is absolutely wonderful. And they do seem, from the news and what they're posting, pretty determined to do this. They're going to have a Steam page up in a week or two. That was as of the 22nd, so 3 or 4 days ago. So expect that along pretty much any day soon. So we'll be able to really get a good idea what it looks like. If you go to the website, they do have a little bit of a story, and they've got some screenshots on here, some pre-alpha screenshots. And it does look very, very similar to, the Eye of the Beholder type games that were out there. And I was a huge sucker for those. And do you guys know those? Did you play those?
Yeah, I'm aware of them. It was never a genre that I was massively into, but I know they're very, very well respected. And this looks, because when you mentioned then, that it was a couple of teenagers, originally I thought was just kind of a, messing around, programming in the bedroom, whatever. But actually, this got quite far along. It was even Surtec were apparently interested in publishing the game back in 1994. So, it got quite far along, and, they're making this for MS-DOS. And then, obviously, when you're a teenager, life goes in different directions, doesn't it, a lot of the time? So, it kind of got shelved. But it did seem like, even back then, there was definitely, interest from major publishers like Surtec in it. So it will be interesting to see. It looks like they've got pretty high hopes for this as well. They said they're determined to make this the best old school fantasy role-playing game ever.
I love the idea that, something that you came up with when you were younger and you all came up with together, and then you disappear and go off and do different things and then return to it years later, decades later, and pick it up again and pick up the same storyline, the same characters. I think that's really cool. There's something special about that. And I was thinking maybe some of the stories I made up and stuff when I was a kid, and I played with a few games. I definitely would revisit them. So this must have definitely been a strong one, and they look like they're huge RPG fans as well.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I've talked about this on the podcast before. I tried to make a text adventure on the BBC Micro. That not knowing kind of how in depth a text adventure has to be, and all the different choices that the player can make. Me and my friend were kind of plotting it down on paper, then we got completely lost and just kind of shelved that after about a weekend. But if Gary Stewart is listening, I've not spoken to you since about 1990, drop me a Facebook message, maybe we'll pick that project up again.
Reunite, complete it.
I'm inspired, yeah. So, this looks awesome, though. So if you want to keep an eye on this, we'll definitely update you on this story, because I think that's very cool. And, the fact that it was getting close to being published back in the day, hopefully, there's not a massive amount of work. It just feels like, it might be this kind of getting back into the stride and finishing it off. And, it'll be interesting to see what platforms it comes out, whether it's going to be an MS-DOS game or whether they'll update it for modern platforms. So... yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So, definitely keep an eye on that.
It does say should be released in 2024 for Windows, Mac, and Linux platforms.
I imagine that's Windows 11, not Windows 3.1. That might surprise us. So, Megavision-software.com if you want to keep an eye on that. And, of course, I'll put that and everything else we talk about in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, this weekend being the final weekend of the month, we all excited? Sunday night. It's always our favourite, isn't it, last Sunday of the month, Joe?
Absolutely. We're going to be doing the Patrons Hangout, which, Pete, you are on pretty much every single week, and sometimes bring the party as well, don't you, pal?
I try and make it interesting. You know, I think I've joined it so far from Rhodes and Wales and the back garden, and always try and keep you guys guessing. And everyone's
From Santa's Grotto
I was going
once
to
as
say
well,
Santa's
I remember.
Grotto as well, yeah.
yeah, I would like to make a bit of effort for you guys, you know. And they're really accepting, great bunch, you know, there's never any argy-bargy or anything. We all have a really great laugh. And the last time I turned up, I wore my cowboy hat, which looked absolutely ridiculous, and not a single person commented on it. That's just how polite and kind and nice these people are. Sat there like a complete idiot, inside of a cowboy hat. Nobody mentioned it.
I've actually got a friend who wears cowboy hats and I never say anything. And I'm now wondering, after you said that, if he's trying to get like a rise out of me after all these years.
He's desperate for your attention. Give it him.
Yeah, but the patrons hang out. So, I mean, if you haven't joined us for this before, it is such a giggle. We'll all get together, like Ravi always says, a bit like the Brady Bunch, isn't it? We're on different windows up there on Zoom. And we talk about all kinds of things. I mean, you know, obviously retro gaming and tech's in there, but it can go off on all kind of weird and wonderful tangents as well. So if you'd like to join us for this weekend's Patrons Hangout that's coming up on Sunday evening, 8 p.m. UK time, now will be a very good time to hop on and join our patrons community. And as well as the Hangout, we'll give you more stuff as well, don't we, Ravi?
Oh, you've put me on the spot now. Yeah. Yeah, totally, we do. Like, we've got a backstage kind of Discord section and channel as well, and we've got an extra podcast, which is the Retro Hour After Hours, which is now on some ridiculous number. I know it got past double figures. I think it's
36.
36. Oh my god. Yeah. And you know, you get an ad-free episode as well, and you're helping support the podcast as well, which you know, is fantastic, and it's kept us going all these years, and you know, we'll continue to do it and deliver some fantastic stuff.
Yes, if you'd like to join us on Patreon, now's a very good time to do it, and join us for the Hangout this weekend. All the details to sign up are on our website right now at theretrohour.com. Right, well, listen, thank you so much, Pete, for coming on and being part of the news. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
You're really welcome. I've really enjoyed it.
And we'll see you for the Hangout this weekend.
Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
And next, we're going to get some stories about the Dreamcast in 2023. Find out why 2023 is the year of the Dreamcast with this week's special guest, founder of Wave Game Studios and Debug Magazine, Daniel Crocker, is next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Daniel Crocker, the founder of Wave Game Studios and Debug Magazine as well. I'm wondering how you're doing, Daniel. You all right?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Recently we met in Nottingham at the Video Game Expo, and you had all of these wonderful titles out, and we recently did an episode as well with Dreamcast Junkyard. So this is going to be a really interesting chat, but you know, I need to ask the question first that we always ask our guests, and this is like, when did you first see a Dreamcast, or when did you first use?
Wow, when did I first see a Dreamcast? If we're talking in magazines, I saw them probably in like 1998, something like that. You know, when they were the hot new cool thing that was going to be coming out soon. First time I saw one in person was Sainsbury's.
That's an odd place to see one.
Well, I remember our local Sainsbury's used to have an aisle full of video games. You know, strange concept nowadays, but back then that was a pretty common sight. And they had a Dreamcast set up, and it was just like the coolest thing I'd ever seen up until that point, and still to this day.
What title was it playing?
Oh, you know, I'm pretty sure it was the first Sonic Adventure. I know it was definitely a 3D platformer.
And were you a big gamer at the time? Were you know, did you grow up with all the other consoles and everything? Were you a big fan of Sega?
I was a huge fan of Sega. I started with the Master System, but oddly enough, very late, about 97.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it was just a case of we didn't really have the money for like the latest and greatest at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was a hand-me-down console, but I still loved it regardless. And then I had a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour of like, right, Master System, Mega Drive, Saturn.
Yeah.
Missed out a few there, but we don't talk about those ones.
And were you you know, when you saw the Dreamcast, were you kind of invested in the Dreamcast? Did you think that was going to be the next big console, or, you know, were you invested in PlayStation at all? Or
I did have a PlayStation, but I didn't vibe with it. I was always a Sega kid. So when the Dreamcast was sort of announced, I thought, right, I've got to have it. It's It looks like the coolest thing. The console looks cool. The graphics are cool. I remember distinctly remembering that the music in the games being advertised sounded awesome as well.
Yeah.
But I never got one at the time because they were too expensive. So it took a while before I actually finally picked one up.
And people were quite. I know Sony came in and everybody knew that they had a big reputation, but they were still reluctant. Sega was the mega cool company at the time, and I was wondering, like,
Way past
what
cool.
were the way past cool? Yeah, they were everywhere, and I was wondering, what were your kind of favorite titles and what really stood out to you on the Dreamcast?
The one that I was the most excited about at the time was Sega Rally 2, because I've always been a huge Sega Rally fan. I was absolutely obsessed with the game in the arcades, and when it came on the Saturn, I was obsessed with it. I bought it for PC as well, and it was just my ultimate game. It was the best thing since sliced bread. That was changed slightly when I realized that it runs at about 15 frames per second or something. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. But then I picked up the Sonic Adventure games and just got completely obsessed with them. Virtua Tennis as well. Probably sounds a little bit of an unusual choice. It just looked so cool, and it felt cool to play.
Oh, I'm gonna say, Virtua Tennis was fantastic, and I'd played Pete Sampras tennis quite a lot on the Mega Drive, so it had that kind of tennis history for me.
Makes sense,
with that title.
So when obviously the Dreamcast, sadly came forth, kind of killed Sega off from the console market and stuff like that. How did you kind of feel, around 2002, 2003? I'm guessing you're a big Dreamcast guy. Did you go kind of straight into like the homebrew scene there, or did you kind of like fizzle out for you for a little while?
You're not going to believe me, but I actually didn't realize that it had the fate that it did.
Oh, really?
I think it's at the time, of course. I know that I really wanted it, but I knew that the chances of having it were very, very slim. So I kind of just forgot about it and put it to the side of my mind until I want to say, I think it was about 2003, because I had heard wind that a bunch of homebrew stuff was coming out. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but it sounded cool. It was like a bunch of free games, essentially, that people have spent their precious time making, and you can just burn it onto a disc and it boots, and it's like, oh wow, that's really cool. And the consoles were like 20 quid at the time, so it was like a no-brainer by that point. And so weirdly enough, I got into the Dreamcast off the back of the homebrew, then realized that all the games at the time were really, really cheap, bought tons of them, and that's where my sort of love affair with the console really begun.
It's that kind of, I'm going to say peak time, because it's not peak time. It's probably the least peak time, but it's that peak time of, in the UK at least, where the Dreamcast keyboard, you'd find them for £1 in your local game shop. You'd find House of Dead and The Gun for £4 or £5 and stuff like that. And you just end up building this huge Dreamcast library and all these amazing games that, not many people were talking about at the time and stuff like that. So how did the love of the Dreamcast kind of like continue from there? What's the story from, 2003, we're collecting all these games, we're buying all these accessories, and we're getting into the homebrew scene. How does Wave Studios fit into that then, over the next kind of like, I guess the next 20 years, really? How does that kind of happen?
It's crazy that it's been that long, to be honest. What was in the back of my head for that entire period of time was Beats of Rage, which is the engine that Senile Team put out. And for quite a few years after that, I used to be an active member in their forums. There was a very active modding scene, so I would help people out with animations and the scripting language that game used. And that was kind of my involvement within the Dreamcast scene, was basically being a Beats of Rage guy. Made a bunch of mods myself, none of which exist anymore, unfortunately, just due to not backing things up. I'm hoping someone will find one of them one day. But that was kind of the thing for me. And then real life happened, and I moved on to other things. Went to college, got a job, started a career in marketing. And basically, not to fast forward too much, it was pretty much just more of the same until 2020.
And just before we move on to the kind of the groundwork of Wave Studios, you mentioned there, your old mods and stuff. What kind of things were you doing back then?
What sort of mods? Well, obviously they were all beat 'em ups.
Yeah.
I had a Matrix themed one,
Oh, wow.
That was called the Chrome Tricks. And it's just because I had a friend whose surname was Chrome, and I don't know, it was a funny thing at the time.
It just fits as well.
Yeah, the kind of thing that 15-year-olds find hilarious, you know?
Yeah.
And I started another one called Project Unreality, which was, I'm trying to think of the term. So you know how you have digitized characters in games like Mortal Kombat?
Yeah.
The idea was that the entire game was digitized. People, backgrounds, vehicles, items, everything was digitized from sort of real life photographs. And that's something I'd quite like to pick up at some point because it was a really bizarre.
I was wondering how much of that kind of homebrewed knowledge and playing around with engines and playing around with stuff led to you kind of being able to technically create a game studio, but also do stuff like, understand GD-ROMs and how that all works.
Yeah, it had a huge part in that for sure. Obviously, authoring Dreamcast games was something that I did just as a matter of course, really, all the time as part of the modding scene. And the reason why it kind of came to fruition again in 2020 was those in the Dreamcast scene will know that Senile Team had a Kickstarter set up for Intrepid Izzy. I want to say it was 2016 or 2017. I'm not entirely sure, but they had this Kickstarter. It did very well. 2020 came along. Obviously, the world went kind of different. And I realized that this game was coming out and it wasn't going to get the attention that I felt that it deserved. I thought it was an absolutely amazing title. And to keep it within that traditional sort of like homebrew community, which is not a huge number of people in the grand scheme of things, I felt like I could probably help to get it out there into the world a little bit more, into the real world, so to speak.
So how do you start that? Like, I'm guessing like lockdown may have helped then, in 2020. I'm guessing maybe you had a little bit more time and stuff like that. But how do you kind of start the studio then and then start? I'm guessing being in the forums and already kind of being in the scene helps a lot.
It sounds like a boring story, but the truth is it came on a whim. I knew this game was coming out. I knew that it looked awesome. I knew that I had the skills and the contacts and the marketing expertise to serve the game and help the release along. So I spoke to the developers and I said, I love this game. You guys know me. I've been a supporter of what you do for 2 decades now.
Yeah.
Let me help you. And they said, yeah, absolutely, sure. Let's do it. They knew that I was capable of this. I knew that they had a great product. So we just said, yeah, let's get on with it.
Do you think that, a title actually coming out on the Dreamcast is quite a good thing for marketing? Because people suddenly go, oh, look at this title coming out on an old console. It's got that
massively
kind of novelty factor,
Yeah, oh, definitely. I've seen it time and time again. Games will come out on, let's say, Steam before they come out on Dreamcast, and they'll do pretty well. But once the game comes out on Dreamcast, it suddenly becomes noteworthy. It's not just another indie game that doesn't get press, which saddens me to great lengths, but it becomes, this is a game which is for some reason on the Dreamcast. So it gets talked about by the Kotakus of this world.
So obviously with Intrepid Izzy, do you think it kind of came out at not the peak, but like the start of, like you mentioned, how like these indie games will come out on Steam and stuff like that and they won't get the recognition they deserve. Do you think that kind of came out at the start of this, like, because I remember on the show, on our news show, going back like 3 or 4 years, and it'd be like, oh my God, there's a new Dreamcast game, or oh my God, there's a new Game Boy game. And I remember having a discussion about, like, does this mean, because they're officially released, does this mean if there's somebody who's trying to get a complete Dreamcast collection, this game would be included? And it was a big deal, in kind of 2019, 2020, 21. And now, like, and, for better or for worse, there's these new games coming out every week,
It's sort of become the norm now, yeah.
And it's sort of become the norm. But do you think Intrepid Izzy and, the kind of start of Wave Studios, do you think that was the right time? Do you think that kind of helped with all of that?
That's a really tricky question to answer, actually, because it felt to me that was the purpose of us entering the scene, is that I knew that this stuff was out there. Homebrew games for Dreamcast have been coming out literally, constantly for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But I didn't see them talked about. And that's the thing. That's what I set out to change. Whether Whether that's because of us or partly because of us, or it was just the right timing, I can't really answer. But yes, there was definitely a connection in those two events.
Yeah.
And where would you say is the biggest kind of community for the Dreamcast in the world? Is it America?
That is a brilliant question. Oddly enough, I would say mainland Europe. The Dreamcast seems to be pretty huge in Germany and France. When you look at our sales, sort of statistics, over half of it is mainland Europe.
I found that really interesting. I don't really, in my brain, and it's probably just me, kind of thinking about it wrong, but I always associate the Dreamcast being big in the UK because a lot of these studios and forums kind of originate in the UK.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That surprised me. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's mainland Europe and UK. US definitely has a scene, absolutely. I don't know whether it's that we haven't reached it yet, but it does seem that the Dreamcast just wasn't quite as popular there for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It was the underdog, but not the underdog which is beloved as much as it
as maybe in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about I'm going to say this wrong now. Beepers.
Beebis too. Yeah,
Beebis too. So this is from John Riggs, who I'm a big fan of as well. How do you go about choosing like which titles to publish? Like which titles to do next, and thinking what's going to do well.
That game has the weirdest story behind it. So we just put Intrepid Izzy out. It had done very well, much better than we expected, to the point where we had to reprint it within about 2 weeks, I'd say. Yeah. And then we put out the special edition version because the demand was there. And what strangely happened as a result of that is that we generated this sort of, I don't want to use the word fan base, a community around this concept of releasing new games for the Dreamcast. Despite the fact that it had already happened, it sort of grew. And John Riggs had put out this game for the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. To my knowledge, it was just going to be a NES game. It was just something for him and his community, just for fun. And someone suggested, hey, you could port this to the Dreamcast because it's pretty easy to get, proper press discs, etc. So he did that. He did a very small run. I want to say 40, 50 units, something like that. Yeah. And they sold out immediately. And he said, no, that's it. It's a small run. I'm done. But what happened on Twitter is that his following were like, oh, just talk to the Wave guys. They'll do it for you. And I didn't even know that we were that well known at the time. Yeah. And, he reached out and he said, is this true? Do you do this? And I said, yep. 2 weeks later, it was done. It was out. Wow. And there was a pre-order up. And, we did 300 copies, I think. Yeah. And they pretty much all went straight away.
That's fantastic. So I guess, the reason he was like, no, it's done is because of, he was probably, I'm guessing, making them himself in his garage at home, kind of like printing the labels and
I think
putting the
yeah.
NES cartridges together. And I guess doing 30, 40, 50 cartridges, that takes weeks.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of labor involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, he's a full-time radio host. I don't know if people know that. But that's his day to day. So, you can't have him making NES games all day.
You can't make them all day, every day. Exactly. No. So what's been one of your most popular titles so far, or some of your other popular titles?
Wow. So the most popular in terms of like sheer attention and numbers, Intrepid Izzy, for sure. The out of nowhere surprise interest was definitely Beebis. But the most recent release, which is Driving Strikers, a kind of car-based football game, that's been very fast to catch up with the others. Like it's been a much quicker rise than the others so far. So it seems that there's a lot of interest in this concept. When I say the concept, I mean the fact that it's an online game.
Well, we'll get into that later because that's some very impressive stuff going on there. But I was wondering as well, some of them have like extra features. So Flea had an additional soundtrack on CD.
It did, sure.
Do people really enjoy those soundtracks? And would you ever consider doing a vinyl release as well with a game?
A vinyl release. So, yes. I think that soundtracks are really important. whether it's viable to do it or not is a huge grey area, shall we say. The way that we've done it so far is that rather than release a soundtrack on its own, we've tended to say, okay, you can buy the game with the soundtrack. So most often we'll give people the choice. You can have the game on its own or you can have it with a soundtrack. It's a little bit more, but you get this extra disc which has the full soundtrack in high quality. As far as doing a vinyl, I would really love to, but it's so expensive to get vinyl made up at the moment. There's all sorts of shortages in sort of the materials required. I believe the main issue is a shortage of nickel. Don't quote me on that, but that's my understanding. We'd love to do it, and we've looked into doing it, but you'd need to sell quite a few.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to be stuck with thousands of vinyls as well.
No. But never say never. That's kind of my motto is that, if you went with the obvious answer, we wouldn't be doing any of this, would we?
Yeah, totally. And I was wondering, you mentioned that Europe seems to be like the kind of center of where it's going on at the moment in Central Europe.
Yeah.
How far have some of your games spread? Have you had some really obscure orders or places around the world that you wouldn't expect a Dreamcast game to go?
The one that always surprises me is when countries which are not typically known for being English speaking in any way, for example, China. We've sold quite a few to China, and that is very, very surprising. A few to Japan, even though the language is potentially a barrier. But the games that we put out don't tend to rely on text too much, which is a deliberate choice. Brazil as well. But that kind of makes sense because Brazil was always a Sega hotspot, right?
Yeah, it's still going there. in
absolutely.
Sense, yeah. You tell us about Rush Rally Reloaded as well, how that came about, because that looks like a really interesting title, especially with the local multiplayer you can do on it.
Yeah, Rush Rally Reloaded is one of my favorites, actually. It was originally released in 2009, I believe, by a company called Red Spot Games, based out of Germany. And unfortunately, that publisher closed down shortly after, so the numbers that were out there were actually quite low. And what I found is that this game was awesome. People wanted to play it, but they just couldn't get hold of it. The only way to get it was to buy it off eBay for some ridiculously overinflated price. So because we had previously put out Intrepid Izzy, I spoke to the devs again and I said, you've got this other game that you put out a few years ago. I'd quite like to do a reprint if that's okay with you. They said, yeah, sure, but we need to try and make it a bit more interesting. It's not just a rehash. So that's why the idea of putting the soundtrack with it. We sold it for a very, very preferable price. And then people that, obviously a few people that picked up the original also picked that up for the soundtrack. But the kind of purpose of that, and that we also succeeded in, was getting the game out to a much wider audience. And in particular, with that one, I really stressed kind of like the physical retail side of things.
Yeah, I saw that you also had like Rumble Pack support in there and stuff like supporting other pads and arcade sticks.
I don't know about arcade sticks. I mean, it technically it does. I mean, that would be a weird way to play. But the main thing with Rush Rally Reloaded is the fact that it's 4-player. And there's not a lot of 4-player homebrew, basically. There's not a lot. So that's kind of like one of the biggest things with that, as well as the online leaderboards. That's kind of like the two most exciting features from Reloaded.
Well, one thing I noticed when I saw you was all the VMUs had displays on them as well. And I've played quite a few titles on the Dreamcast that don't have displays on the VMU and stuff. Do you think that's really important to have in a game?
I think that's pretty important. I mean, at the very least, it should have a logo or something. It was an integral part of the console, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And, it just adds to that whole kind of marketing package there, and also the ability to auto-save onto it as well.
I was about to say, it completes the package with Dreamcast. I think VMU support 100% with the games.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned auto-save there. That's actually something that I didn't really think of, but was actually a very unusual feature back in the day when the Dreamcast was a new system. It was very much I suppose the way that games had the language of games, as it were, was that you get to a certain point and you save at that point. It might be like a safe house or some sort of save location. Like in the Pokemon games, you can technically save anywhere, for example, but the best place to save was in a Poke Center. Whereas we've moved now in the modern era to this kind of like concept of autosave. So it's constantly saving all the time. Anytime anything sort of significant happens, just before you go into a boss battle, for example, it saves.
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing back in the Dreamcast days, but as a result of porting some of these games from the PC world onto Dreamcast, we're starting to see that happening now, and it's a really strange experience, but it's kind of like, why not?
I think it kind of brings it forward as well a little bit, into the 21st century, and it kind of modernizes some of these games as well.
Yeah,
to an
100%.
extent. So tell us about Xenocider and how, what's the story there?
Xenocider, that was a cool one for me because it's completely 3D. There aren't many 3D indie games for the Dreamcast. Yeah. Don't quote me, I think there's 2 or 3. And that was, to the best of my knowledge, it was the first. And again, it had a fairly small print run. It did very, very well. But as is the nature of these things, you do your one print run, it does well, and then that's the end of it. And I wanted to see it get out to more people, basically. And it's as simple as that. So again, it's gonna sound like a broken record, but I spoke to the devs and I said, this game is really cool. Nobody in the UK has it. Let's change that. Yeah.
So are you a big fan of the Space Harrier style games?
Yes. Yeah, big fan.
Yeah.
That's what drew me to it, because there's a lot of Dreamcast stuff, but I'm looking for, completely selfishly, games that I think I enjoy. Because my sort of theory, I suppose, is that if I enjoy it and I think that it's very, very good, the chances are that at least a decent percentage of people are going to agree with that. And what we're finding is that we're exhibiting these games at UK-based events because we're UK-based.
Yeah.
And almost nobody, at the beginning at least, almost nobody realized that these games were still being made for the Dreamcast. So the goal was very much to show it off. This is a game that's reminiscent of something you may have played before. It's got a unique twist to it.
Yeah.
And it's brand new, and it's exciting, and it's affordable.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like you say, some of these games start at £10. They're very reasonable and affordable, sometimes. And I understand why some of these Kickstarters and indie devs, they put these games out at £50-60 because they have to. But I guess, they
don't have a choice. Yeah.
They don't have a choice. But, I guess having the foundations and being around for a good few years now with Wave Studios gives you that ability to make it more affordable, which is great.
Yeah, we tried to keep it like the price as low as possible, whilst also making sure that the developer is getting paid.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the other publishers out there are doing, but I know that the biggest priority for us is to make sure that the developer is getting the lion's share, because the idea is that if they do well, they'll make more games, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they'll keep going because they see the what's the word? Not the light in it, but the not just getting their work out there, but the rewards of it as well. So
exactly. Yeah.
So is it hard to implement the VGA in titles, and do you have to downscale any graphics for the Dreamcast at all?
VGA is pretty easy to implement, actually. To get technical for a moment, the way that most Dreamcast games are made now is using what's called an SDK. Sega had an SDK back in the day, but nobody uses that because it's a bit of a grey area whether you can release something that's used that. So everybody uses an open source SDK. I believe there's one called Dream SDK, but there's also one called Callisti OS or Chaos. And that basically just has all of this built in. So if you want to support VGA, you just say VGA equals 1, and all of a sudden VGA works.
Oh wow!
So it's I wouldn't say it's easy to write a Dreamcast game, but it's a lot easier than it would be if that wasn't available.
Well, it was really interesting to see a title, Postal, coming out for the Dreamcast as well. Where did the idea of publishing that one come from? And I was just wondering how much you work with Running with Scissors as well.
Yeah, so that goes back to about 2016. Running with Scissors had released the source code to Postal. They just put it out there and they said, look, anyone could do what you want with it. Please, can someone do a Dreamcast port? And for years, nothing happened until sometime in 2020 or 2021, a chap by the name of Dan Redfield, he said, okay, if no one's going to do it, I'll do it. So he started porting the game to the Dreamcast. He was posting updates as he went for quite some time, sort of over a 6 to 9 month sort of period of time. And I messaged him and I said, you know what? This is really good. This is up to the quality of a commercial release. So maybe we can look into speaking to Running with Scissors and get official permission to actually put this out there. I believe it was always going to come out as a sort of digital download type release. But I thought, this is a game that could have come out on the Dreamcast when it was new. So perhaps there's a way that we can get it as a like an officially licensed title, full permission, get all the artwork and get it manufactured. So I messaged the guys from Running with Scissors and in my typical style, which is, hey, this would be cool. Do you want to do it? And to my surprise, they replied in about 20 minutes and they said, yep, absolutely, let's do it. And, obviously there was a bunch of negotiation and they wanted to make sure they get paid and they wanted to make sure that Dev gets paid. Of course, that's our entire goal as well. So we came to an arrangement and, surprisingly easy, really. It was just a cool thing to do and they were on board with it.
And that's a proper commercial title as well. I know you had other indie titles coming out, but did it, having something with a rating come out and all of this kind of stuff, was that quite tough to negotiate, or was a lot of the stuff already in place and it was just like, put it out there?
A lot of that was already in place. There's all sorts of grey areas with like releasing something for an old, obsolete system. Like, do you get a PEGI rating or not? Do you need one? PEGI themselves would say, we don't rate games for Dreamcast anymore, so we can't help you there. So because it already had an 18 rating, it was kind of, well, it's still an 18 rating then. It's the same game. Nothing's been changed.
And I guess it might have got you quite like high regard and credentials, putting something out that was a proper commercial one as well. Did people take you a bit more seriously once?
It's definitely the one that got the most attention. I suppose it mainly got the attention of, this is a controversial game. It was banned in a bunch of countries, and now there's a Dreamcast version. What's this all about? Very, very strange idea, right? I mean, it's not something you'd expect to read in your gaming news.
No, but it kind of fits so well as well. It's kind of one of those things that you'd never see Sega releasing as well. So
no, I suspect not. No, I mean, I don't think it's ever been on a Microsoft console, for example. Well, the original hasn't been released on anything. The Dreamcast version is indeed the only console version ever released, weirdly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a very, very strange situation.
Yeah, it is. I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
There is a remake, but it's a different game.
It's not the original, yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Redux one. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Redux is kind of like, it's the story is the same, but it's a completely different game. And yeah, that's on Switch, I believe, and nothing else.
Of all the consoles, a Nintendo console as well.
I know, right? They've completely changed their tune these days. A very different company.
Very, very different. So tell us about Shadow Gangs. This is one of your more, I say recent, but one of the more recent titles that Wave Studios put out, and very, very, very Sega Mega Drive, if you will. Very Sega. Really love the look of Shadow Gangs. What's the story there?
Very Sega, very late 80s Sega arcade, I think. Is probably the best way of putting that.
Yeah.
Shadow Gangs is a very, very long history. It started development in around about 2007, 16 years ago now, at time of recording. And it was the brainchild of one chap. I only heard about the game fairly shortly before launch, if you can believe that.
Oh, wow.
I know that it had a following, I suppose a cult following that had amassed over those 16 years. It was originally released as a PC game, as most of these games are. Someone had asked him, the developer, could you release this on Dreamcast? And his initial reaction was, yeah, haha, very funny. But then, the community is nothing if not persistent. And with the help of a bunch of the sort of veteran devs out there, he actually went and did it, the mad lad. And then as with a bunch of the titles that we've put out, it was a case of everyone was saying, you need to contact these Wave guys because we need this physically. This needs to happen. This needs to be a thing. And he did. And we basically just talked for months and months about like how best to approach a commercial release. And I was looking at it from the perspective of, we might not necessarily be the ones to do this, but at least I can give him some advice.
Yeah.
And warn him of some of the pitfalls that can come with manufacturing Dreamcast games and the sort of marketing of that. It kind of all started off that we did the distribution. Well, we manufactured and distributed all of the Kickstarter items. So the regular edition of the game, there was a soundtrack, there was a special edition and an ultra edition, which had like the game, the soundtrack, a PAL case version, the blue fragile cases that you either love or hate.
Love them.
Some people love them, some people hate them, and there's no in between.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there was like a poster and like some sort of signed thing and a T-shirt. We did all that on not enough of a budget, but we did it. We got it done. We got it out to everybody, and that was the start. And then, the crucial thing was that everybody was expecting this to come out in October this year. We actually shipped it about 2 weeks after the Kickstarter ended.
Oh, wow.
It was meant to be like a kind of a response to some of the other Kickstarters that have happened in the past, not to name any names, where, many, many, many years later, they say, oh, sorry, we're not shipping this game. So he said, you know what, I'm going to be the anti-Kickstarter stereotype. I'm going to ship it immediately after, and then a month after that, you can then buy it if you didn't back it.
Yeah.
Which I just thought was brilliant. It was absolutely hilarious. But it also really proved to some of the more cynical folks that this can be done, and it can be a great release, and you can make people very happy.
No, that's fantastic. That is. It's cool that it came out straight away. And it's funny because it's like a slap in the face, but it's not a slap in the face. It's like you say, it's hilarious. It's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, it's not the norm.
Take a year or two. No, it's not the norm at all. Not at all.
And that's nothing. That's nothing against those games that do take that long. But I think the expectation with Kickstarter is that you're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah,
and I think he just wanted to be a bit of a troll, basically.
No, I like that. It's a troll, but it's like the anti-troll because it's something cool.
It's a good troll.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was wondering how region and there's different region locks and stuff on different consoles, how that's affected your games, and also would you consider doing like a PAL release and also a Japanese release as well?
So that's a great question. The games are region free. They don't need to be region free, but we see no reason for them to not be. We always do a sort of a European looking one, a Japanese looking one, and a US looking one. We don't always distribute those versions. Sometimes we'll use a distributor in those respective countries. For example, in the US, we quite often use VGNY Soft based in New York, but we'll always design a version. But the actual disc is the same. It's the same content. It's the same region freeness. So you can buy an American one and play it in Japan, a Japanese one and play it in Europe, UK. It's no.
There's no need
issue
to put region locks on it these days, is there?
No, I mean it's possible to do it, but
yeah,
why would you?
Yeah, why would you limit it like that when you want these games to be played?
Yeah, we want them to be played, and we want them to have the widest number of people that they can be accessible to.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about Alice Dreams tournament. That looks awesome. Tell us all about that.
Alice Dreams. Where do I start with this one? This was another one that had its release, had been kickstarted, I believe, and I wanted it to get out there to more people, and I thought it was really fun. So I contacted the devs. I did my thing. We got it out there, but crucially, it's been a really good one for events because you have a bunch of people that love retro gaming all in the same space. Quite often, you'll be there with friends or family. It's not often you go to one of these events yourself. So you'll have a bunch of friends that can play a 4-player game of Alice Dreams tournament, which, to explain the gameplay, it's kind of a Bomberman-like, where you're navigating a maze and you can drop bombs to blow up your friends, basically.
Yeah, the graphics look awesome. I really love that style.
Yeah, it's sort of like a hand-drawn kind of thing.
Yeah, hand-drawn. It kind of reminds me of Flash a little bit, but then also, I forget the name of it. The Dreamcast game that came out in Japan where you run around the Sega studios. I can't remember what it's called. You know which one I mean, though. It came out. It was like one of the last releases on the Dreamcast official.
Not Sega Gaga, right?
It could be that. It could be that. I can't remember its name.
I've actually not played that, so I'm just guessing.
Awesome.
So one title that I saw you playing was Drive Strikers, and that seems like an awesome title. It seemed really good fun, and it kind of reminded me a bit of Rocket League. Great seeing advertising for Dreamcast Junkyard in there as well. How did this title come about?
Driving Strikers. It's an interesting story. It really started off just as a tech demo, just as a way of showing off what can be done on the Dreamcast in 3D, which, as I mentioned earlier, is quite a rarity in Dreamcast sort of indie homebrew type titles. It started off as a little tech demo, and the concept was, what if Rocket League had been released 25 years ago on the Dreamcast? It wasn't a way to shoehorn that game onto the Dreamcast and lower it down into a VGA resolution or anything. It was like, if that concept had been thought up at the time, how would it have been done? So that was the story behind that, and as is the story a lot of the time, the community really liked the concept, and they said, right, we demand a full version. And Luke, being the wonderful people pleaser that he is, said, yeah, okay, this sounds like a really fun thing to do, and spent the next year of his life making that a reality.
I'm amazed to see that it's got, online play and multiplayer, which is mad, having a lobby and kind of meeting people on there. And it's the first online multiplayer game released for the Dreamcast since 2002 as well. Which
it
is amazing.
Yeah. As far as we know, there may possibly have been something in Japan, but I don't believe so. 21 years without any online, without any new online games, and now it felt like the right time. And as I said, Luke is a genius, and he said, you know what, I want to do something that's going to stand out. So not only is it going to be a really fun game that is different from anything else that's been on the Dreamcast, it should also have online play. And not just online play, but online play that's cross-play compatible with the PC version. So you can host a game on your PC from the version that you've grabbed off Steam, which was released on the 24th of July, by the way. And then you can have all your friends on Dreamcast connect to it, or have the Dreamcast connect to each other, or whatever you want to do, basically.
That's amazing. I'd love to see that happening on lots of other titles. And I guess there's no Sega Net involved there.
No Sega Net involved, no. As long as you've got an internet connection of some kind on the Dreamcast, whether through the broadband adapter or the modem, whichever method you go for, you basically just connect up to the game connects to a matchmaking server, which is run by Luke. Reality Jump is the company, and it's completely free. It basically just does matchmaking and authentication, sort of to make sure that it knows that it's you. And then once it's done that matchmaking, the Dreamcasts talk to each other and connect directly to each other in that way.
That's absolutely mad. Another project that you've kind of been involved with, sounds like you don't stop. It's been Debug Magazine as well. And
yes.
I know that Sega Power are involved with that as well.
Yes.
Tell us about Debug Magazine and how it's kind of gone and started.
Debug, in a nutshell, is a new print magazine, which is all about indie games. So the idea is that it's just like some of the highest quality mags that you may remember from 20 years ago, but it's all about the best of now within the indie scene. The way that started was basically prior to Sega Powered magazine being launched. I had a chance meeting with Dean Mortlock, who is the editor of said magazine, was also the editor of Sega Power and Saturn Power back in the day, for those in the UK. And we had talked about doing some sort of indie mag, like it would be cool if that were to happen, but, obviously no one would be crazy enough to do it. And after about 6 to 9 months of Sega Powered being out there, I brought it up again and I said, I think we could probably do this. I think there's interest in it, but it's also like we actually have something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I think there's so many titles that have, come out that could do with some extra exposure and stuff, and people really looking into them. And magazines are like the perfect format for that.
Definitely, and it's whilst indie does not necessarily equal retro, a lot of indie games definitely have a retro feel to them. They're inspired by the games of yesteryear. I suppose it's because the people making the games were playing these older, 80s, 90s, early 2000s games as they were growing up, and they're now making games that are reminiscent or inspired in some cases by those types of titles. So it felt like a natural fit for us to get involved in.
Yeah, it fits really well, and you also seem to be doing a little Dreamcast debug indie sampler as well, which is I guess it's like a little cover disc then that works for the Dreamcast.
Yeah, so the indie samplers are a bit of a strange one because they're a bit like a cover disc, but we don't actually distribute it with the magazine because the magazine is primarily modern based. Whilst we do have a retro section, it would be quite strange to distribute a Dreamcast demo disc with a game all about modern, a magazine all about modern games. Yeah. So, yeah, it's Debug branded, but we sell it through the Wave website. We don't actually sell it. It's free. It doesn't cost anything, but it's available through the website.
Yeah, kind of burn your own or use
you can burn your
digital.
own. You can burn your own if you want, but even the physical discs are free.
Well, before we go, Daniel, it's been a wicked interview, and I'd just like to know, what are your future plans, and is there anything you can talk about at all?
Oh wow, well, more of the same. That goes without saying. I would really like to do some sort of compilation. I'd like to do some sort of disc which has a bunch of small games, mini games, maybe like a WarioWare. That's what I would like to do.
Oh, that would be good. Yeah, using all the crazy Dreamcast accessories.
Yeah, and they could be mini games, right? They don't have to be full experiences, but if you've got a bunch of them on one disc, yeah, maybe we'll see something like that at some point.
Well, Daniel, keep at it, and I think it's amazing that we're seeing these games released. And do you get any crazy reactions from people when you say, "Oh yeah, I'm publishing Dreamcast games in 2023"?
You know what? It's nothing but those kind of reactions. It's nobody says yes. That makes sense. That's completely normal. I understand. Every single time it's like why are you doing this? Like, are you mad? But I think it's important to do something fun, and if it's viable and it's making a lot of people very happy, and giving the devs something to do and a living to be made, then I'm happy to do it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.